Anyways, so it was a mix of limit and big bet, so I think we're going to do that.
That'll be a fun game. Fun to watch, at least.
60. It's okay.
Big blind, you're 20. Oh, okay. 20.
60 from Nick with pocket nines.
Yeah, but I guess like all the players they would want to get are playing it. I don't know who else would.
Art with ace king of diamonds.
I guess you could get Nick Schulman.
Yeah. I think he's taking a break or something, he said.
What was that?
I think he tweeted out like he's taking a break or something.
Well, he would have been cool to have.
That's what Ryan's saying. I said, you should get Nick Schulman on the show now that he's no big superstar.
Well, this is interesting here because you got a 3-bet here from Art, right, with ace-king suited. And Dan's on the button with king-queen suited. And we could actually see a 4-bet here. I don't know if Dan's going to really play a flat call. It might be a 4-bet or fold strategy, and he does 4-bet. I mean, at straight 10-20, these guys are pretty deep. I mean, they're 500 big blinds deep.
And all of them relatively similar. I mean, Dan with the smallest deck, but still all of them right around 10K.
And now the question here for Art is, you know, if he had ace-king offsuit, I think Nick's going to fold. But if Art had ace-king offsuit, I think he would lean more towards a call here, but he's got ace-king of diamonds, so maybe we see a 5-bet. But look at this, Nick is in there anyways, and that might actually incentivize Art to 5-bet even more here because of the dead money. So raise 3-bet, 4-bet, call.
It would be, I think it's a tough spot that Art is in, because clearly you want to 4-bet this hand as often as possible. You want to get it heads up against your opponents.
It would be a 5-bet.
With Nick, excuse me, 5-bet.
Yeah.
But with Nick smooth calling this, you think he's a little bit wary?
I think that he's going to take this hand as one of his like bluff hand. I mean, you say ace-king suited as a bluff, but I mean, this is certainly a hand that you can 5-bet almost as a semi-bluff to get some of these hands out, and that's what he's going to do here. So, you know, maybe he 5-bets aces and kings here, and ace-king suited, and maybe like some ace-5 suited. We've seen Art go crazy with ace-5 suited. He plays a very tag-on-steroid style. That's why he's done so well in tournaments. He plays well post-flop, aggro pre, but with the right types of hands.
Dan gave him a quick sideways glance.
It's a company that sponsors people, you know?
Well, no, the Chinese means like
because I don't know the address.
And it's an interesting spot here for Dan because you don't get into a spot where you've got a guy that cold calls the 4-bet from up front all that much.
Well, and you think about the range, though. I mean, Nick really has exactly what he's advertising, right? What's that smooth calling range? 8s, 9s, 10s, maybe even jacks, right?
It's probably like 9s through queens and maybe ace-king.
I don't know about queens. Gosh, wow.
I mean, is he gonna 5-bet Dan with queens?
Maybe.
It's definitely an interesting one. And like I said, Dan's got an interesting scenario here because he's on the button. He's getting a price, but again, you know, the hand would benefit from being heads up if he's ever dominated here.
So
32 years old, he's going to be the all-time money leader if he wins this.
Players still asking, how do we have an all-star game without Garrett? He just couldn't make it, guys. So he did win as one of the highest requested players, but couldn't make it tonight.
Let's give it a little quiet.
Yeah, so it looks like both guys are going to call here. So it looked like Dan did call. The graphics aren't quite up there yet, but I believe he did call. Is that right?
3 players.
Yep, 3-way action in a 4-bet pot.
And what about Dan's call? Are you calling 5-bets with King Queen of Clubs? Yeah. Is it specifically because it's on the button and he's hoping to gin it here, or does he think that that Art can have, like you said, he's capable of doing this with Ace-5?
I think it's close. I think it's close because of the position with Nick in here, but we have a really interesting flop here because Dan here obviously has flopped the flush draw here with 2 overs. Nick obviously has a pair, and I think you could play this a number of different ways, and Dan chooses to check here. He does not semi-bluff. I think he thinks that maybe one guy has at least a pair, you know, an overpair to the board. It's not going to get through. He decides to take the card, and now Nick is going to come out here and bet with 9s. You know, if I was in Nick's spot, I would still be a little bit overly concerned that I might not have the best hand, but he does have the best hand, and he's going to bet very small. He bets 1,200. Now, Art is in a really weird spot because he's in the middle here. I think heads up you would almost always call if you checked back the flop, but here he's got to deal with Dan behind him, so I could even see him folding here. But it's so tiny, Nichoel. He's getting like 5 to 1, so it's an interesting hand right off the bat.
And the way Dan has played it, I would call if I were him. The way Art has played it, I would let it go at this point. I would have liked a bet from Dan on the flop. You know, I mean, this is one of the best flops you can get against 2 opponents in a 5-bet pre-flop. You hit 2 overs and clubs. Really, obviously, you want your clubs. You're not 100% certain your 2 overs are good against 2 opponents. I would have liked the bet there. He probably still would have been looked up by Nick.
He makes the call, and now the river is a 5. And this is going to be interesting here. And I think part of the reason maybe why Dan checks it back is he might like to try to balance and have some flushes that he doesn't necessarily bet on the flop. But I'm assuming Nick's going to check here. And obviously Dan has absolutely no showdown value. And it will be interesting to think or interesting to see if he bluffs here. Obviously, there's really no way he's going to win the hand by checking back, but does he think that Nick is ever going to fold a pair to this board the way that this is gone? There's the check, so let's see what Dan does here. We've seen Dan run some really, really big bluffs in the past, too. He's almost played in Nichoel like he has, like, jacks or queens. That's what I would be concerned about.
Are you ever checking those on the flop, though? When you're almost 100% certain your opponent has ace-king.
I think that when it's 3 ways and Nick might have, like, jacks and queens themselves, I might check back, like, 10s, 9s for a little bit of pot control. So this was going to be interesting to see. And it looks like he's going for it.
I just think the way it was played, I think this makes it an easy call for Nick. You know, he may not love it, but it's going to be what you could say, what you call a crying call in this spot. If Dan had bet that flop and applied pressure on the turn, and now again the river, more than likely he could have won the pot.
Well, this is what we're talking about, though. He's bet 3,400 here, and his hand doesn't really look like a flush draw, because for the reasons that you talked about. So it really looks like, I think it looks like 10s through queens here. I don't know if Dan is necessarily calling the turn with ace-king and now bluffing with it. And you would have thought that he would bet a lot of flush draws on the flop. So he ends up with a busted flush draw here on the river by not betting the flop, and he's put Nick in a really tough spot.
Nick is clearly worried, and because this does look so value-y, like, please call me, and that's what Nick is worried about. To me, I just find a crying call here, like, oh, and the way you played it, you suckered me in. If you happen to have, like you said, the jacks and the queens, and you played it that way, and to me, I'm thinking, you didn't bet this flop, then you got me. And that's exactly why people do it, why good players do it, like Bart is saying, because now you got me calling with 9s on this river no matter what.
But what would you think that, but if you were in Nick's spot and you bet the turn and Dan called, what do you think he has that he's betting the river with?
I think for sure he can have clubs. I think he can have ace-high clubs in this spot, the way the hand was played pre-flop.
That he didn't bet on the flop?
Yeah, which I wouldn't do, but
okay.
Yes.
I mean, yeah. I mean, that's why it actually possible to where it looks like a kind of a, instead of him going like bet check or bet, he checked back the flop, and it's hard to put him on clubs.
Nick trying to talk it through. Here it comes. Ooh, almost.
Brian, people are asking for their vouchers.
Oh, yeah, no,
Specifically, they're rich people.
Asex Crazy says, I think I think Art is balanced enough to check over pairs on such a dry board. Yeah, that's possible. And there's the call.
Crying call.
There's the call.
Yeah, he doesn't like it. He hates it. He says, take my money, but he's going to win. You made me sweat. Woo, but I'm going to take it. And
One for the good guy.